It's time for the Josh Kirby on Sports podcast.
On this edition of Josh Kirby on Sports, my conversation with a very special guest coming up next, so stay tuned.
Oh, indeed. I'm glad you connected. This is Dave Johnson, voice of the Washington Wizards. You have connected to the right place because you are listening to my man, Josh Kirby, on Sports Podcast.
Oh, yes, indeed. Another episode of my great podcast. Yes, indeed. I am the host, Josh Kirby, and the Josh Kirby on Sports Podcast, part of the Mayo Please Podcast Network, is brought to you by Route 11 Chips. Make sure you find them in stores Martin's, Food Line, and Giant. And big thanks out to JR Beats Official and Dave Johnson, as always. Let's get started. We have a very special guest in studio today. One of my good friends and avid sports junkie, in my opinion, and pretty good high school coach for my alma mater, Sharando High School, for their softball team, Clarence Smith. Clarence, great to have you on the show. How are we doing today?
I'm good, Josh. I'm good.
Good, sir. So, quick rundown here. How'd your season end up this past year?
We had a pretty memorable season in the sense of a lot of team goals, a lot of individual accomplishments. I think we set a school record for most home runs by a team. We had 3 different girls hit 5 home runs on the season. Another one at 4. We were just hitting long balls left and right. So that was a lot of fun to coach and to witness. But ultimately, we came up 1 game short. We fell to Fauquier with an opportunity to go on to the district championship and secure a bid to regional play. But we'll get right back at them and be ready for next season.
Yeah, always great to see with you and a young team building something great. And yeah, a lot of players this year on your squad were really young, and you made the best of what you could, and they played pretty good. Your record was, if I'm correct, I'm sorry, it escaped my mind. You had over 10 wins, correct?
Yeah. We finished up 13-8.
13-8, not bad. And moving to the other side real quick, what do you think of Warrior baseball with their 15-2 record, if I'm correct, with only 2 losses, 1 in the regular season and 1 in the playoffs?
Yeah. And you know what? Speaking of making corrections, I actually think we were 13-9, but nonetheless, it's always fun to try to follow the baseball team. We often play opposite of each other, so I very rarely get to see them play. It's nice to have a couple of those students in class too, so I can kind of keep tabs on them a little bit better. But they're headed up by a couple of legendary coaches, and Coach Martin and Coach Bodenschatz. So those 2 coaches and their staff seem to have those kids ready to play every year, season in and season out. So it's pretty remarkable.
Yeah. So yeah, and another great thing about softball in this area is the great rivalry you formed between the school across town, James Wood. Tell us a little bit about how that rivalry sort of grew over the years into a fan favorite that's highly attended in such a close game.
Well, I think that it's born of familiarity. I think that the rivalry comes from these girls in the area having grown up and playing on the same, whether it's rec league teams or travel teams or what have you. And then once they split and they go on either to where, the blue and gold over there at James Wood or the red and black here at Sharando, they understand what's at stake. They understand that it's about bragging rights. They understand that it's about, making their mark in this rivalry that has now kind of grown pretty large over the last few years, and witnessed some really close games that. I mean, they make a fan out of most softball, or excuse me, they make a fan out of for softball, for fast pitch, excuse me, for anyone who has the opportunity to come and see them. I mean, we see grand slams. We were victimized this year. We had a big grand slam a couple of years ago. We had a walk-off home run in our first meeting this year. We see like amazing pitching feats. We see defensive gems. I mean, it really has a little bit of everything. So I think that that's why it's kind of grown, and word of mouth, and next thing you know, the stands are typically full and crowds are raucous. So it's nice. It's fun.
Yeah. So, do you? What's your preparation like for coaching? Coming into the school year, what's your preparation like getting ready for a season?
Well, it's the high school season presents a challenge because you have 20 games, and on the schedule, they're typically spaced out pretty well. As the athletic director, Mr. Barb, does a great job of setting our schedules up. But of course, Mother Nature always wreaks havoc on our schedule, and sometimes we'll run into situations where we're playing, you know, 4 games in 3 nights, or six and 8 days, this kind of thing. So it actually prevents us from being able to do some of the things that we would normally like to schedule in practice. So typically, we really work hard at conditioning in the off season and in the preseason, and then once the season begins, we really try to refine some skills here and work on body maintenance, so that ultimately we're trying to peak toward the end of the season. So that's the objective.
Yeah. So, great stuff. Continuing. How many years is this for you now, Coach?
I just finished up year 14 and year, oh gosh, I think it's 7 as the head coach. Is that right? 8 as the head coach, I think.
Geez, and I was with you for like 2 or 3 of those years, and what a great time that was.
Yeah, I mean the sport, I think, is I mean it's evident that it's growing here in the area. We've seen a couple of travel organizations come in, including the Swarm. Shout out to Eddie Jeffries there and his organization. And they're not able to establish a foothold in the area if the game wasn't popular enough to get kids to join up. So you have folks like the Reinhardts who continue to make rec ball in Frederick County a very important and integral part of our player development. And because of this, we're seeing the talent levels increase. It also is reflective of what the game is doing nationally. UCLA just capped off a pretty amazing 2019 Women's College World Series tournament, and the ratings consistently have now made Women's College World Series games the third most watched amateur games behind, of course, the NCAA football college playoff and then March Madness. So if you think about that and you think about the popularity, that's more popular than baseball, more popular than women's basketball, soccer, lacrosse, any other amateur sport, and softball's in third place with that right now. So I think that we're only going to see the sport continue to grow, and so it should be fun. It should continue to be fun.
Yeah, so great stuff from that. Thanks for giving your insight on coaching a little bit. So moving on now to national sports wise, I want to start off, with your favorite teams, and you are an Ohio State Buckeyes fan, and Dwayne Haskins
OH.
gets picked up by the Redskins. So I want to get your thoughts on how you think the Redskins are going to do this season with Dwayne Haskins potentially under center.
Now, understand that you're right. I'm a big Ohio State fan. This match was made in heaven as far as I'm concerned. But I do think that my bias aside, it's a great acquisition for the Redskins. Leading up into that and listening to what all the pundits were talking about, there was plenty of speculation that the Redskins were going to try to trade up into that draft to grab Haskins. Ultimately, they stayed right at 15, and Haskins fell to them. And again, my bias aside, you can make an argument that he's the best passer in football. Now, obviously the Cardinals have something to say about their guy, but you're talking ultimately about Haskins, who threw for 5,000 yards and 50 touchdowns in the season. So as that game translates into the NFL, he's one of those big, sturdy guys. I've heard People liken him to Ben Roethlisberger. I don't know. Whatever way you look at it, you're talking to a guy who had one of the most prolific seasons in college football history, and yet is being overshadowed by the Cardinals rookie, who incidentally only had 1 year starting as well. But nonetheless, I'm just super excited that Haskins is going to be wearing the burgundy and gold, hopefully for the next decade or so.
Very tough 5-6 games for the Redskins this season. It it's it feels like to me it might be a bumpy start, but your thoughts? There are like 3 out of the 5 games in the division um to start the season.
Yeah, what I've come to learn is that you can't really count on wins or losses from these teams. You can kind of speculate, and it's always fun to try to guess at, what things are going to do. But of course, injuries play a part in this, and simply teams underachieve and other teams overachieve. So I like to just kind of focus on the Redskins and try to use my amateur eye to determine whether or not they're good enough. And obviously, we'll get an opportunity to watch a little bit in preseason heading into this, but just based off of what we had last year and what we're bringing into this year, the defense has an opportunity to be, one of the top tier defenses in the entire league. But there are some obvious holes on offense. We let Jamison Crowder go, so he was our most productive wide receiver. So now you're looking to try to replace him, and of course you're hoping like Jordan Reed's going to be healthy, but that might be a fool's endeavor to kind of count on that. So we're going to be looking up, for some guys to step up, including Dwayne Haskins, college teammate. Look to see Terry McLaurin have plenty of opportunities early on here. So, again, looking at the Redskins and their prospects, you like to say that if our defense can do what it, could potentially do as it's written on paper, then we should be able to be in most games. I like our running back situation with AP coming back and Darius Guy's going to be healthy this year. Bryce Love could be a sneaky little pick as he gets healthy over the course of the season. And Chris Thompson, of course, is dynamic back in himself. But ultimately, from time to time, we're going to have to move the ball through the air. And it'll be interesting to see if Haskins gets that call from week 1 or if it's going to be a little further in the season. I think ultimately, if this team, if this team is going to be successful, it means that, Case Keenum is going to have to really push Dwayne Haskins. And then ultimately, if Dwayne Haskins gets the call, it means that he was that much better than Case Keenum. So we'll see.
Yeah, as a Redskins fan, I've come to learn just don't get your hopes up. I'd love to see the Redskins do well, but the over the past couple of years, our heartbreaking disappointment watching the Redskins try to make it to the playoffs and falling that much short. It's going to be interesting to see. I do like the pick with Haskins. I'm glad the Redskins didn't trade up to get him, but it's going to be really, really interesting to see. And I know you're going to be tuned in since you're a huge Buckeyes fan.
Well, you gotta keep hope because this is the same team that started off 6-3, and now of course Alex Smith gets hurt, so there's a change under center, and as I mentioned, Jameson Crowder goes, but our offensive line should be healthy going into this year. There's been a lot of Trent Williams kerfluffle in the news, but I think silence is probably a good indicator that hopefully the Redskins are going to get something worked out with them. So if you get him back in that offensive line healthy, that 6-3 team, are we more like the 6-3 team, or are we more like the back end of the last 7 games of the season? So I'd like to think that we're closer to that 6-3 team, and that we'll never have to see Josh Johnson or Mark Sanchez starting under center for us again. But I'm quietly holding out hope. I think that this team is potentially sneaky good, and I know that the Cowboys are champions on paper every year, and the Eagles are a couple of years from the Super Bowl. But I don't know that those teams are far and away better than the Redskins. So we'll see. We'll see.
Any other NFL teams, in your opinion, you're looking at to have a make or break season or looking to do well? Any predictions, bold predictions as a whole for this season?
No, I mean, I really try to just focus on my Redskins. I have a pretty decent understanding of what some of these players can do, just because I do enjoy playing fantasy football. Patrick Mahomes won me a couple of fantasy championships last year, so I'll certainly be keeping an eye on him this year. But as far as the team dynamic, I'm true blue Redskins fan, so that's where my focus is.
Yeah, so moving right along here from the NFL, the NBA draft took place couple nights ago, and of course, Zion Williamson goes number one overall to the Pelicans. And coach, in your opinion, I'm sure Zion Williamson, along with the trade moves that brought Anthony Davis to the Lakers for some of the young Lakers guys, is Zion going to help the Pelicans out in the long run after Anthony Davis left?
I mean, it's going to be interesting to watch because ultimately you're talking about Anthony Davis as being probably a top five player in the league. So I think that anytime you're subtracting a top five, I think inarguably a top 10 player in the league, you're subtracting him and you're thinking that you're going to get all of that production in a rookie. I think it might be a little far fetched, but Zion Williams, he seems to be special. So, we'll watch and see. Meanwhile, I'll continue to focus on my Wizards and our long road back to respectability.
Yeah, so the Wizards actually picked up Roy Hachimura. I'm so sorry if I botched that, but the first
Really, yeah.
Japan-born athlete to get drafted in the first round of the NBA draft. What are you looking for from him?
Josh, we got to get young. I mean, we got to get youth in there infused, as well as some players that are going to kind of set a standard. And we're in a big transition phase, and we put a lot of eggs in the basket of John Wall, and he has a couple of really unfortunate injuries that have certainly curtailed his career, and hopefully he can make a speedy and full recovery. But it has also had major ramifications on the Wizards. We've watched them have to trade away a couple of other young pieces, and Kelly Oubre and Otto Porter over this past season, trying to infuse the team with alternatives while also trying to get back under that salary cap, while staring down at the end of Bradley Beal's contract, as he potentially could have been offered a supermax contract at the end of this year. He ended up not making that All NBA team, so the supermax goes away. But now there is news that they're going to actually extend a contract to him rather than trade him for young pieces. So at the end of the day, to answer your question, we need some talent here to give this club a little bit of direction. Hopefully, we can build around Bradley Beal, as I'm a big fan. Rui Hachimura, you look at how decorated he was with his time at Gonzaga. Was voted the best small forward in the nation, and along with many other accolades. And I think that you have an opportunity maybe to start building some foundational blocks that can be around here for a while.
Yeah, so not really anything else that's too notable out of the NBA draft, besides Zion and Jay Moran and of course Roy, I can't even say his
Rui,
name right, but
Rui.
yeah, thank you. But yeah, other than that, not really that many notable pieces, but the Raptors winning the NBA finals. I wanted to get your thoughts on that over Golden State with their injuries. Obviously, in my opinion, I think injuries won the Raptors the game, but I wanted to get your take on that as well.
I mean, it's hard to say that injuries won them the game. I mean, every team has to go through ups and downs. I'm watching the Wizards right now, as we just talked about John Wall and his injuries. At the end of the day, like Kawhi Leonard, he's a man amongst boys in a lot of these cases. And sure, Kevin Durant got hurt, yeah, and Klay Thompson in the final, minute of the final game. So can't really count that as an injury in the in the grand scheme of that series. But you're still looking at probably a first ballot Hall of Fame, not probably, undoubtedly a first ballot Hall of Famer in Steph Curry, two-time MVP. You have Iguodala there. You have Boogie Cousins. It's not like suddenly, you're looking at, a team led by Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi Leonard goes down. Now you're in trouble with just, Kyle Lowry left. I mean, Golden State was star-studded, and at the end of the day, I think that the Raptors had a game plan and they executed. It seemed like the Raptors could get to the basket anytime they wanted to. So Golden State's defense certainly struggled. And then if Steph Curry wasn't and Klay Thompson weren't hitting some of those long 3-pointers that we've gotten accustomed to them seeing, it looked like the Warriors offense had trouble getting things started.
Yeah, so NBA talk there for you, and moving right along. Now, I'm not sure where you are baseball wise. I know you're sort of disappointed in the Orioles, but one thing to look at, they just signed their newly prospect catcher, Adley Rutschman, if I say that correctly. A lot of weird names on this podcast, but he just got signed as a catcher. Another piece to add to the puzzle for the Orioles.
Yeah, let's hope so. Yeah, Adley Rutschman. Like this guy again. We were just talking about Rui a minute ago and all the accolades that he brought along with him. Adley, coming out of that Oregon State program, won the College World Series last year. Had an even better season individually this year before getting knocked out of the quarterfinals, I believe it was. This is a guy who can do a little bit of everything. He's got an above average arm, above average glove behind the plate. He hits for average. He's showing power now. He set a bunch of World Series, College World Series records, like most hits in the series, and some other things that he did there. So, I mean, this is a guy who is certainly accustomed to success. The catcher's position is always tough to find those premier prospects. When you take a look at the Major League Baseball, you have maybe three that are sitting on top with probably Real Muto as being the best this year. And anytime you can get a plus defender who can also swing the bat from behind the plate, like just really gives you a lot of depth in the lineup. But he's a far way away from playing. This is 2019 season. Maybe 2021. By then, hopefully, some of these other draft picks will have panned out. They seem to do pretty well with the trades that they were forced into last year, thanks to some short-sightedness from the front office. I had to move guys like Manny Machado and Jonathan Scope, two of my all-time favorites. Had to let Adam Jones go. Didn't get anything for him, but letting some of these guys, Kevin Gossman and Darren O'Day and Zach Britton, to the Yankees. Seeing all these guys that were integral parts of a very winning franchise, I do believe the most wins in Major League Baseball from 2012 to 2016, and then to watch them bottom out with 115 losses last year and on record or on pace for even more losses this year. It's pretty tough to swallow as an Orioles fan. But some of these trades, as I mentioned, seem to have some guys who are having some pretty good seasons in minor leagues. So hopefully they can continue to develop and maybe won't have to go through 14 years of misery again, like the last break basically in between playoff appearances.
Yeah, and more MLB news here. Max Scherzer, a couple, I want to say less than a week ago, breaks his nose on a bunt, and that's not stopping him. He starts the very next day with a black eye and a broken nose and pitches a pretty darn good game. I'm not sure if you watched that, but that's something I had to put out there. That's a pitcher I can get behind, Max Scherzer.
Well, it's funny. You had these guys. We mentioned Steph Curry earlier, and you could put certainly LeBron James and Kevin Durant, and Max Scherzer goes in that pantheon of the top echelon of players in their respective sport. I mean, the guy is just he's all time good. He's passing seemingly Hall of Famers on the all time strikeout list. With each start, I think that he's somewhere like 13th now on the all time strikeouts list, which is just remarkable. And I think that, when you're watching the team dynamic, it's easy to kind of, forget that Max Scherzer is as good as he is. It's sort of like watching Major League Baseball and then seeing the standings and watching the Angels, struggle with, a few games under 500. And meanwhile, they have arguably the best center fielder player period of all time. When you compare his like seasons to Hall of Famers, Mike Trout at that same age is by far and away like the best player ever. So the point behind that is, when you're watching the Nationals and you're like, come on, when's this playoff push going to come? The 3 games out of the wild card right now, it's hard to, to remember, hey, I need to sit down and watch this guy work because I may not see another pitcher like him in Washington for decades, if ever. So I think it's important for us to keep an eye on that. I did hear some rumblings that the Yankees were going to do whatever was necessary to get Scherzer to end his career in pinstripes. I hope it doesn't happen. I hope that the Nats can, kind of right the ship. They've been playing really well of late. Hopefully they can continue that and get in the playoffs, and then it's anyone's game.
I could not imagine Max Scherzer in a Yankees jersey, for crying out loud. I love him in a Nationals jersey, and I hope it stays that way if the Nationals can make that playoff push. News I just heard today: the Nationals are calling up Fernando Rodney to help the Nationals bullpen out after releasing Trevor Rosenthal. And wow, Fernando Rodney gets another shot. In your opinion, do you think he will do pretty good with his crooked hat and his bow and arrow up in the air after every win?
After every save.
Yeah, save.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, hopefully for the Nationals' sake, but I think there was probably a reason that the guy was out of baseball. And you and I were talking earlier. You said he's 42.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's that might be some wishful thinking at best to think that a 42-year-old who was just out of baseball can come in and right the ship as far as the Nats bullpen is concerned. I think more than likely you're going to have to see them dip into the trade market before the July 31st trade deadline and see if they can't pull a guy or two into that bullpen to be able to help them.
Yeah, I mean the bullpen, they've been having ups and downs and injuries all around. Robles just went down the other night due to dehydration. And yeah, I mean they've been playing better than they were towards the beginning of the season. I just hope they can keep it up and make that push for the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean it's 162 games, so it's not a sprint; it's a marathon. And during the course of the season, most teams have ups and downs and their ebbs and flows. And hopefully, we saw the low part of the Nats, early in the season when I think they had something like 9 guys on the injured list at one point or something like that.
Yeah,
It seems like
something like that. I couldn't even
yeah,
count.
yeah, yeah. It seems like they've got something working right now in the recipes. They're one of the hottest teams in baseball, and we're not even to the All-Star break yet, and you're 3 games out of a playoff spot. You got to like your chances. And what's more, they're playing in an NL East that isn't, dominant. Doesn't have those front runners like my Orioles in the AL East with the Yankees and Red Sox. Where those the Orioles season is over. At the end of May. Because those two teams are so dominant in their division. The NL East it's being led right now by the Braves, and I think that the Nats are 8 games back. So, with half of a season left to play, we'll see. We'll see.
Yep. So, a lot of great sports talk, but that's all the time we have on this edition of the Josh Kirby on Sports podcast today. Clarence, thanks so much for joining us once again. Any last words for our fans out there?
Josh, I had a good time, man. I appreciate the offer, and I was glad I was able to make it work out.
As I've always said before, I'm surprised you're not working for ESPN because of how darn good you are at talking sports.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate that. Maybe I should consider my day job, huh?
I don't know. Yeah, you're like a man of many talents. You can teach, you can talk well on sports, you can play some good slow pitch, a whole bunch of everything. You're a man of
Yeah,
many
thanks, man.
talents, and I'm just glad I got you on just in case you're making it somewhere famous to talk about sports. Just remember that.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate it, man. I'll remember that it all kind of got started here. So thanks again, Josh.
Yeah, so you're welcome on anytime. Hope to hear from you again soon. As always, this is the Josh Kirby on Sports podcast, part of the Mayo Please Podcast Network, sponsored by Route 11 Chips. Make sure you find them in stores Martin's, Food Lion, and Giant. Thanks once again to Dave Johnson and JR Beats Official for our music and intro as well. Make sure you find us on social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and we are also on YouTube, Spotify, and Google Play and SoundCloud on the Mayo Please. Till next time, this is Josh Kirby signing off, and we will catch you on the next edition of the Josh Kirby on Sports podcast. Peace out.